Some students at Northeastern University and residents of Roxbury recently held a protest against plans for a new dormitory. Northeastern plans the student housing in a 26-story building on Columbus Avenue close to Ruggles Station. To tell us about the campaign are two representatives, the media contact for Socialist Alternative, Carey Howard, and a student member of the group, also with Northeastern chapter of Young Democratic Socialists of America, Julianna Milidantri. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Juliana, because you're currently a student at Northeastern, living in a dorm while you're at school. What's wrong with having another dorm?
So what's wrong with having another dorm like this is the fact that they're billing it as a luxury dorm and are making it very, very unaffordable for all but the wealthiest students at Northeastern, not to mention they're being pretty bad neighbors to Roxbury. The starting rent for a shared bedroom in this building will be somewhere around $1,300 a month as the lowest starting price, which means having a single bedroom to yourself will cost twice the market rate in Roxbury, approximately.
Carey Howard, normally building a dorm means less pressure on the surrounding real estate market and maybe even less gentrification. So why is it this dorm is seen as doing the opposite, creating more gentrification in Roxbury?
Yeah, what we see when, things like luxury dorms are built is that it's really raising the prices of rent in the area. So, as Northeastern has continued to develop further and further into the Roxbury community, what we're seeing is just an increase in rent in an area that really should be a little bit more affordable than living right in Boston proper, but certainly it's not. And particularly sort of in the context of coming through this wave of the COVID-19 pandemic where, access to affordable housing and homelessness has been just such a huge pandemic as well in Boston, just continuing to perpetuate that, using this, prime real estate in Roxbury to build a luxury dorm that really students don't need and can't afford in lieu of building affordable housing, we think is just really a totally missed opportunity.
Well, I mean, the global upper middle class is part of the market for higher education. This is not just about Northeastern. So why not give them what they can afford to pay for if it keeps them out of Mission Hill, for example? Isn't that reasonable?
I think what we actually find is that most students who go to Northeastern move off campus as soon as possible because they can't afford to live in the dorms. That certainly was my experience when I went to Northeastern, that you're required to live on campus for the first couple of years. And then most of the time students leave because even with how unaffordable Boston is, it's cheaper to rent an apartment in Boston in Mission Hill or in another area than it is to rent a dorm. But then often what you find is that students who have gotten their education in Boston graduate and then can't afford the rents in Boston, and so aren't able to actually use the skills that they're acquiring in their undergrad degree in the city where they've gotten their degree because it's so unaffordable.
Juliana, back when I was your age, I bailed out of a dorm for something cheaper too. What about your mind? I mean, what do you see in your future? I mean, would you want to look for something other than a dorm to live in before you finish college?
Yeah, so it definitely would be something I would consider. The tuition and housing prices at Northeastern are already so high that just for my family personally, and for honestly, I would say the majority of Northeastern families, it's kind of the only option because it ends up being so much more affordable than even some of the cheapest Northeastern dorms. Northeastern separates their dorm pricing by economy, standard, and enhanced. And this luxury dorm would be what they would consider enhanced housing. But we already lack good economy housing. The kinds that we have they tend not to be in good condition. I have friends who lived in Northeastern housing this semester who had a mouse in their kitchen the entire semester. They couldn't get rid of it. So we would really like to see Northeastern put a little bit of money into the dorms that they already have as well.
Well, back in my day, we could put up with things and get away with paying less money. But now we're talking about the pandemic era. And if you want to have a less disrupted college education, what does that mean for your choices?
So as far as having a less disrupted college education, I think that pretty much any college student would consider that to be an education where they're able to be in person, and that means being able to pay for housing. So I think especially for the upperclassmen who are allowed to live off campus, who will be returning in the fall of 2021, maybe after having not seen the campus for almost a year, they would probably choose to live off campus because it's so much more affordable than most of the options that Northeastern has.
Carey, I want to talk some more with you about the Roxbury impact, because there's a long history around the piece of land where this building sits. At one time, it used to be part of Roxbury where people lived and worked. It was cleared because of the plans for a highway that never happened. But on the other hand, there was an attempt in the 1980s to have community benefits from this land. That did not work out. So what does that mean now?
I can't really comment on the 80s, unfortunately, but, I think what we're seeing right now is Northeastern is a really powerful entity. They are one of the richest universities in the area. They're able to not pay their property taxes. So this is money that they're, solely profiting from as an institution rather than paying back into the community. What it's going to take to really stop this luxury dorm from being built is continuing to build this movement of students who oppose the dorm, of Roxbury community members who oppose the dorm, and of organizers and activists who oppose the dorm. And what we're seeing through this campaign is that overwhelmingly people do oppose the dorm being built. And so we need to make sure that our voices are heard and that Northeastern registers that this is the case.
Well, just a couple of years ago, one of the people who opposed the development of the dorm was this district city councilor, who's now acting mayor, Kim Janey. What would you like to see there instead of what Northeastern is currently planning?
Yeah, we think that there should be a high quality social housing complex built at 840 Columbus Ave that Roxbury community members can benefit from. Right now, the wait list for affordable housing in Boston is sometimes a decade long for people who are paying market rent in Boston and absolutely can't afford it, are paying well more than the recommended 30% of their annual income to be housed. And so when you see, as Julianna was saying, dorms at Northeastern that already need improvement, that could be improved for students, and an area of land where housing could be built that Roxbury community members could live in affordably, or that could house some of the homeless population of Boston, that just seems like so much of a better use of that land.
Julianna, what about you, as far as what you'd like to see done instead?
Yeah, so at 840 Columbus, I would completely agree that I would love to see a green Union Belt affordable social housing unit. And then as far as what Northeastern needs to like quote unquote build for housing, if they really crunch the numbers and they decide that they absolutely need more housing, I think that they have a lot of brilliant minds on their team. They could find a place on their campus to build more economy housing for students that's also high quality.
So in other words, would economy housing that you just mentioned, would that be part of this complex, or would it have to be maybe at other locations?
In my mind, it would be separate, but if that were, maybe a compromise that the university wanted to make, that would also be great to see. But that would definitely not serve their, their bottom line, their monetary purposes. They make a lot more money from a luxury dorm than they would from economy housing.
Carey, one thing about the history here is that, Northeastern got title to this land, and they have it. It's certainly worth quite a lot. And to ask them to give it up, that seems to come at a price. So how can you make that work?
Yeah, I mean, in the face of this pandemic, Northeastern has profited, millions of dollars while we continue to see homelessness and housing unaffordability just, be a total problem for working class people. And so I think the question of whether or not Northeastern can manage to not take in the profits that they would make from this luxury dorm, I think is unquestionably just, of course they can. They're doing just fine without it. I was researching for the speech that I gave at the rally earlier this week, and I learned that to solve the homelessness crisis in the United States, would take taxing the universities in Boston 3 years worth of their property taxes. So when you think about sort of the mass of that problem at scale, it seems infeasible that these things can be solved. But then you look at, institutions like Northeastern, like Boston University, like others who are not asked to pay their property taxes. If they actually had to pay that to the community, these problems could be solved. So I think it really is unquestionable that Northeastern does not need the profits that they would garner from that luxury dorm.
Julianna, I know it's maybe typical for students to go to schools in other cities and tune out what happens in the neighborhoods that surround those schools. But what about your mind? You're going to school every day, practically in Roxbury. Does that influence your thinking about what you want to do?
Yeah, I would say that going to school in Roxbury and then also like neighboring Fenway and Back Bay impacts my thought process a lot. And I think that a lot more Northeastern students think about it than you would expect, especially it's a discussion we have all the time in the Young Democratic Socialists of America. I know it's a discussion going on in other campus organizations like Northeastern Sunrise. We care about the impact that our university has on the city because we know that we came here recently within the last 4 to 5 years tops. And there are families who've been living here for decades, generations, who deserve a say in this huge university expanding and making decisions about their homes.
Well, I'd like to thank you both very much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
us.
you.
There was Carey Howard and Julianna Milidantri. We'll have more news in just a moment.